Mark Davidson had always considered himself a man of principle. Raised in a small southeastern town, he had learned the value of hard work and loyalty from his parents, who ran a modest hardware store. His father's words echoed in his mind during tough times. "You build trust one brick at a time, but it only takes a single blow to tear it down." Mark met Rachel at a local charity event when he was 27. She was vibrant and full of ambition, a stark contrast to his reserved demeanor. Their chemistry was undeniable, and within 2 years they married, combining their dreams to build a stable and happy family. Mark started a career as an aircraft mechanic, while Rachel ventured into event planning, thriving on her creativity and energy. Their life seemed idyllic on the surface. They had 2 children, Anna and Jacob, whose laughter filled their home with warmth. But as the years passed, cracks began to form in their relationship. Mark's long hours at work left him exhausted, while Rachel's growing social circle often kept her away from the family. Arguments became a regular feature of their evenings, though they always tried to shield the kids from the tension. A turning point came during a particularly stressful period. Mark was struggling to meet a tight work deadline, and Rachel had taken on a high-profile client whose demands consumed her time. Their communication broke down completely. One evening, Rachel didn't come home after a work function, later saying she stayed at a colleague's place because she was too tired to drive. Mark's suspicions grew, though he tried to ignore them, not wanting to face the possibility of betrayal. Months later, Mark discovered a series of text messages on Rachel's phone while searching for his son's missing tablet. The content confirmed that she was seeing another man. Confronting her led to a bitter fight, during which she accused Mark of neglect and claimed she felt trapped by their life. Mark pleaded for counseling, but Rachel insisted their marriage was beyond saving. In the weeks that followed, Rachel's behavior grew increasingly erratic. She spent nights away from home without explanation, leaving Mark to care for the children alone. The final blow came when she suggested separating, saying she needed her freedom. The emotional toll was immense, yet Mark resolved to stay strong for Anna and Jacob. But as Rachel's absences increased and her detachment grew, Mark felt his family slipping away, piece by piece. Despair overwhelmed him. His marriage had fallen apart, and his life was in disarray. Everything he had worked for disappeared in a moment, leaving a void that weighed heavier each day. Why had she done this? He couldn't make sense of it. His mind swirled with questions, but all he found were remnants of a life he struggled to accept. Leaving Brayton's restaurant late one evening, he dragged himself back to the hotel, gathered his belongings, and left hers untouched. "Let's see if she even notices her stuff is missing," he muttered. Clothes, makeup, a husband. After checking out, he drove home and parked his Ford Explorer beside his F-150, staring at the house with a sneer. "Home feels more like a tomb, and I'm the ghost stuck inside." Inside, he was greeted by suffocating silence. Not peaceful, but oppressive. He collapsed onto the couch, tears streaming down his cheeks, thinking of Anna and Jacob, and sobbed for over an hour. At some point, something in him broke. He stumbled to the bar, grabbed a bottle of whiskey, and smashed its neck against the counter. Taking a burning swig offered no comfort, only trembling hands. In sudden rage, he hurled the bottle at the fireplace, where it shattered, spraying glass everywhere, and knocking their wedding photo off the mantel. The frame cracked as it hit the floor. A raw, guttural scream tore from him. "Enough," he whispered, voice hoarse. "This ends now." Gaining a cold resolve, he went to his office and turned on the computer. The clock read 10:24 p.m. "Let's see how much damage I can do," he muttered. Logging into their joint accounts, he drained them, transferring every cent to his personal account. Savings, vacation funds, household budgets, everything vanished in moments. The final total showed $17,638.38. He stared at the number with a grim smirk. "Revenge on a budget," he hissed. leaving a few dollars in 2 accounts before closing the rest. He typed letters, one to his mother, another to Rachel's parents, detailing her betrayal and his decision to leave. He drafted emails to local news outlets with dates, names, and details, saving them carefully. He also wrote letters to Anna and Jacob for their 18th birthdays, trying to explain his choices and hoping they'd someday forgive him. After printing and sealing them, he set them aside. In the bedroom, he packed clothes and essentials, then showered, dressed, and laced up his boots. "This is it," he muttered. "Time to move forward." Pulling on his coat while coffee brewed in the kitchen, he scribbled a note on a yellow pad. "Rachel, we're done. Goodbye. Live with the consequences. Guess who?" He placed the note on the table, setting his wedding ring on top. Returning to his office, he opened the tools safe Rachel always hated and took out his .357 Colt Python, ammunition, emergency cash, and their marriage certificate. Back in the kitchen, he tore the certificate to shreds and pinned the pieces to the wall with a knife. Then, in a flash of sarcasm, he poured some ketchup on it and stepped back. "Perfect," he muttered. Satisfied with his symbolic farewell, he carried his supplies to his F-150, camping gear, fishing equipment, extra gas cans, and ammo. He left the fridge unplugged with the doors open, then slashed the power cord. A pang of doubt hit him as he thought of his children. "Am I doing the right thing?" he whispered. Silence offered no answer. Steeling himself, he climbed into his truck and drove away, leaving the house unlocked. The streets were empty as he drove into the night. By 1:30 a.m., he parked outside Gordon Willis's law office. Too drained to think, he set his phone alarm for 8 a.m. and dozed off. When the alarm sounded, Mark stretched, sipped cold coffee, and dialed Gordon's number. After a few rings, the lawyer answered, his steady voice a small comfort. "Gordon, it's Mark," he began. "I need help. Can you meet me at your office? Bring a notary. I'll explain everything then." "What's going on?" Gordon asked, concern creeping in. "Is Rachel okay?" "Not over the phone. Just trust me." "All right," Gordon said after a pause. "Give me an hour, and don't do anything reckless." "Thanks," Mark replied, ending the call. 50 minutes later, Gordon arrived in his Cadillac. Mark greeted him with a firm handshake and a thick stack of papers. They headed upstairs, where Gordon brewed coffee and motioned for Mark to sit. Mark laid everything out, recounting the events with an icy calm. By the end, he was no longer crying. His grief had hardened into resolve. Gordon listened quietly, his face somber. When Mark finished, Gordon sighed deeply. "What do you want to do?" he asked gently. Mark's eyes narrowed. "Disappear," he said. "No divorce, no legal battles, just vanish." She walked away without a second thought. "I'll do the same." "And the kids?" Gordon pressed. "What about them?" Mark's face darkened. "What about them? Are they even mine? She only cared about herself. Why should I care more than she does?" He exhaled sharply. "Set up a trust for my 401k and pension for the kids at 21. You'll have power of attorney so I never have to deal with her again. Can we make that happen?" After a long pause, Gordon spoke softly. "Yes, Mark, we can, but understand the consequences. She'll file for divorce. After 2 years, it's finalized without your consent. But your kids, they'll never see you again. Your mother will be devastated. Are you sure?" Mark's expression was a mixture of anger and unyielding conviction. "Counseling. So she can cry and say it meant nothing. That we can fix it if I just try harder." "No. She made her choices. Let her live with them." His voice trembled with bitterness. "I want this to be a nightmare I wake up from, but it's not. And I won't sit in some therapist's office being lectured on forgiveness or told to think of the children. She destroyed us. I'm done." Gordon said nothing, letting Mark's anger hang in the air. Mark took a shaky breath and continued in a cold, quiet tone. If my life is ruined, hers will be too. Gordon wiped at the corners of his eyes, and Mark stood straighter, his posture rigid. At that moment, Gwen Harris, Gordon's assistant and a notary, knocked softly and entered. Sensing the tension, she was polite but brief. She returned with a tablet and a cup of coffee. Together, they went over the legal documents: a separation agreement, power of attorney, and trust accounts for Anna and Jacob, with Mark's mother and Gordon as trustees. Every detail was finalized and signed. When they finished, Mark handed Gwen letters for his children to open on their birthdays. Standing, Mark shook hands with both Gordon and Gwen. "I'm sorry," Gwen said gently, eyes full of empathy. Mark nodded, face impassive, feeling only a hollow numbness inside. Stepping out into the overcast day, Mark found it strangely fitting, a somber reflection of his life. He headed to the bank and withdrew most of his savings, leaving only a token amount. He filled his truck's tank and auxiliary tank at a station, plus 2 jerry cans of fuel. Next, he visited an internet cafe to upload letters to his mother, Rachel's parents, and a few local news outlets. He canceled their shared credit cards, reporting them as stolen to block Rachel's usage. The rain had slowed by the time Mark left the cafe, the gray March skies over Fairview softening just enough to hint at a new beginning. By 2 p.m., he was driving east, destination unknown. After 7 hours on the road, he spent a sleepless night at a roadside motel, his thoughts refusing to let him rest. By midday the following day, he arrived in Silver Bay, Easton, a quiet riverside town along the winding river. It was off-season, and the stillness soothed his frayed nerves. Parking near a diner called Harriet's, he stepped inside. A cluttered corkboard near the door displayed flyers for babysitting, dog walking, car sales, and rentals. One ad jumped out at him: studio apartment, 1 bedroom, kitchenette, shower, quiet area, no smoking or drinking, $135 per month, cash, utilities and internet included, parking for 1 car, references preferred. The simple wording offered Mark something he desperately needed: a fresh start. He pulled the paper free and walked to the counter, where a smiling older woman stood. Her name tag read Harriet. "Well, hello there," she said, warm and inviting. "What can I get you?" Mark held up the flyer. "This still available?" Harriet studied him with kind but sharp eyes. "Looking for a place to stay? And what about work?" Mark hesitated. "Both, I guess." Harriet nodded knowingly and made a quick phone call. "Hey," she said into the phone, stealing a glance at Mark. "I got someone here you should meet. Looks all right to me." "Sure, come by." After hanging up, she chuckled. "Don't worry, they're good people. Hungry? You've got time for a bite?" "Sure," Mark said. "Roast beef sandwich, salad with ranch, and sweet tea." "Coming right up," Harriet replied, disappearing into the kitchen. The food was surprisingly good. The beef was tender, salad crisp, and coleslaw a perfect complement. Mark was on his second glass of tea when 2 strangers walked in: a slender, athletic East Asian woman in her early 40s and a tall, rugged man in his 60s with a distinct military bearing. The man led the woman to a seat on Mark's left, then took the stool on his right, removing his sunglasses to fix a penetrating gaze on him. Mark smirked. "Don't be shy. Grab a seat." The man didn't flinch, but the woman smiled warmly. "Hello, I'm Nana Lewis, and this is my husband, Grant." "Say hello, Grant." "Hello, Grant," the man muttered, eyes never leaving Mark. Nina offered her hand, and Mark shook it. "What's your name? Where are you from? And why are you here?" she asked bluntly. Mark was cautious but handed over his license and gave a vague summary. "Are you married?" she pressed. "Yes," he answered reluctantly. "Kids?" His voice sharpened. "Yes, but I don't know where they are. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to. I haven't done anything illegal, just made questionable moral choices. If that's a problem, I'll move on. Grant's deep voice broke in. Enough, Nina. She fell silent, and Mark turned to face Grant, who studied him for another moment before his expression softened slightly. Rent's $150 a month starting next month, Grant said. It's clean and quiet, and that price won't change unless you break the rules. Interested? We'll show it to you and shake hands to seal the deal. Mark raised an eyebrow. Shake hands. Grant nodded. I'm a man of my word. After a pause, Mark shrugged. Let's see it. He paid his bill, around $5, and left a generous tip. Harriet nodded approvingly as he followed the Louises out. Grant exchanged a few words with two sheriff's deputies, grabbing coffee before leading Nina to a shiny black Jeep, quietly murmuring something to her. Mark noted the fleeting smile on Grant's face as he turned serious again. Grant drove ahead while Mark followed in his F-150. The Jeep had Marine Corps and American flag decals, along with an older flag from the 1970s. After about 12 minutes, they turned down a secluded driveway, opening into a cluster of raised bungalows by the water. It was a serene spot, worlds away from the chaos Mark had fled. They stopped near a small blue cottage with white shutters, right on the riverbank. Mark parked and joined them on the wide veranda. Grant unlocked the door and gestured for Mark to enter. The inside felt peaceful, simple, but cozy. At roughly 1,200 square feet, it featured a small kitchen, a bathroom with a shower, a bedroom overlooking the river, and a living room with wooded hill views. Wraparound windows opened onto the veranda, and ceiling fans turned slowly. There was a freestanding wood stove in one corner. Though basic, the place was well insulated and comfortable. I'll take it, Mark said, turning to Grant. Grant raised a hand. Not so fast. How are you paying? And do you have a job? Not yet. Any work around here? Mark asked. Grant sized him up. What can you do? I'm a licensed aircraft mechanic, decent with woodworking, good on a forklift, Mark replied. Grant nodded thoughtfully. All right. Minimum wage, cash under the table at the lakeside marina. You'll wear a branded t-shirt and jeans. Sometimes local churches or charities need extra hands. They'll pay cash too. But don't take advantage of anyone's kindness. You do, and you're out. Got it. Mark allowed himself a faint smirk. Understood, boss. Grant held out a hand. Be at the marina's restaurant at sunrise. If you come half an hour early, you can grab breakfast. We'll see what you're made of. Agreed. Mark shook his hand, sealing the deal. That handshake was a turning point. Over the coming months, Mark learned about the Louises' history. Grant had been a Marine scout in Vietnam and had rescued Nina's family before relocating them. Eventually, they reconnected and married despite opposition. Settling in Fort Caldwell, Grant rose to infantry sergeant major. They raised 4 children who all joined the military. Their daughter, Megan, graduated from an academy, became a lawyer, and was dating a young doctor. Life with the Louises gave Mark stability. The mild eastern climate helped him refocus, and he sharpened his woodworking and mechanic skills while keeping his aircraft license up to date. Grant gradually entrusted him with more work at the marina. He even started a small construction business, hiring a veteran and an ex-offender. In time, he became close to the Louis family, feeling like part of it after 3 years. Yet, the pain of his past still haunted him. Nina was shocked when she learned about Rachel. How could anyone do that to her own kids? She exclaimed before apologizing. I'm sorry, Mark. That was rude. Mark's eyes darkened. I care about Anna and Jacob, Nina, but I can't even be sure they're mine. Believing they are would mean trusting Rachel. Nina sighed sympathetically. I get it. I really am sorry. Grant, listening quietly, finally said, You're still broken, son. No judgment here, but you are. Despite 3 years of relative peace, Mark knew Grant was right. His bitterness kept a hold on him. However dulled it had become, things began to change one Sunday morning. Leaving the grocery store, Mark saw a young woman being harassed in the parking lot by 2 men. She struggled to get into her Toyota Supra, her screams for help going unanswered by others. Mark set his bags on his truck's hood and rushed over, snapping open his folding baton. "Hey!" he yelled, catching their attention. One man held a tool. Instinct took over as Mark cracked the man's wrist with the baton. The tool fell to the ground, and Mark shoved the injured man into his accomplice, slamming them into the car. They collapsed in pain. The woman, crying, scrambled to the back door. A child was strapped into a car seat. Mark called Daniel Lewis, Grant's son, and a deputy. "Daniel, I need backup. Grocery lot. Attempted robbery or worse. Hold tight." "We're on our way," Daniel said. Mark kept the 2 men subdued until Daniel and another officer arrived, weapons drawn. The woman, Hannah Carter, introduced herself, tearful yet relieved. She and her daughter were shaken but unharmed. Mark felt he'd finally done something good again. Hannah invited him to lunch at Harriet's. Though hesitant, he agreed. For the first time in a long while, he felt a spark of optimism. After locking his groceries in the truck, they walked to Harriet's diner. As they entered, Harriet teased them. "Here for the hero discount." Mark blinked in confusion, and Hannah laughed through her tears. "Word travels fast, Harriet." Daniel radioed the incident in. Harriet chuckled. "Looks like you're a local celebrity." "Well done, Mark. I knew you had a good heart." Mark blushed, unused to attention. 2 older men came in, greeting Harriet before one approached Mark. "Great job, young man," he said. "Glad to see someone step up." The second man chimed in. Grant always had good instincts about folks. He gave Mark a quick handshake and left. "Seems you're the talk of the town," Harriet said. "Our newest hero. Can we get dinner before his head inflates?" Hannah joked. They all laughed, and Harriet recommended the daily special: grilled chicken, fries, and spinach with a salad. Hannah also ordered chicken nuggets and mac and cheese for her daughter, Linda, who watched Mark quietly. As Harriet slipped into the kitchen, Hannah turned to Mark. "Did you know that Nina and Amanda have been trying to set us up? They think you need saving," she teased. "Well, guess fate had its own plan." She changed the subject. "I'm 29, divorced 3 years. My ex-husband was abusive, went to prison, then passed away last year. My sister did the divorce paperwork. It was her first case." Hannah's voice trembled. "I'm a licensed accountant, specializing in investments and estate planning. My firm's doing well." But today, her composure finally broke, and she began to sob, the full weight of the ordeal crashing down on her. Mark knelt beside her chair and hugged her. It felt completely natural. Linda started crying too, and Mark pulled her into the embrace as well. Harriet returned quietly, leaving iced tea and apple juice without interrupting. When Mark sat back down, Harriet's usual grin returned, and she winked at him. Clearing his throat, Mark said, "Hannah, I need to explain something. When you introduced yourself and Linda, I froze. You share the same names as my ex-wife and daughter, just reversed. It threw me off." Hannah nodded, inviting him to continue. Mark told her his story: Rachel's betrayal, his departure, and his years of guilt. He was honest about the pain and his regret. "I'm not proud," he admitted, "but at the time, I saw no other choice. Talking now, it's like I can finally breathe." Hannah absorbed every word, then gently placed her hand over his. "I'm sorry for your pain, but you can heal, Mark. I've been through it. It's not easy, but it's possible." Their food arrived, and they shifted to lighter topics. Hannah revealed she'd lived in Silver Bay for 4 years since leaving her ex. Linda, now 5, was her world. After dinner, she gathered her things and thanked Mark again. She shook his hand, lingering a little longer than necessary, leaving him with feelings he couldn't quite identify. As she left with Linda, Mark realized she'd left him the bill. "This little trickster," he said, shaking his head with amused disbelief. Harriet, overhearing, grinned. "Don't complain, dear. She's a keeper. Worth paying for, right?" Mark chuckled, settling the tab and stepping outside with a contentment he hadn't felt in ages. Weeks passed, and Mark saw Hannah more often. Occasionally, they took Linda out for ice cream, and Mark felt his guarded heart slowly thaw. One Thursday, Mark heard about a barbecue at the Louises the next evening, and was invited. Grateful, he arranged to take Saturday off, anticipating a late night of good food and conversation. On Friday, he followed his regular routine: breakfast at the Marina Cafe, servicing boats, and wrapping up work by late afternoon. After going home to shower and change into fresh jeans and a t-shirt, he drove to the Louises' home, a sprawling log-style ranch with a wraparound deck, a pool, and a smoking barbecue pit. Nana greeted him enthusiastically, ushering him into a lively scene of kids running and adults mingling. Before long, he was introduced to Grant and Nina's youngest child, Megan Lewis, a sharp attorney, former Marine officer, and the center of hopes that she'd soon marry her doctor boyfriend, Eric. Despite her impressive resume, Megan focused her full attention on Mark. "Mark," she said kindly but directly, "how are you really doing? You've been here 3 years, and my parents speak highly of you. You're stable, reliable, and someone has noticed." She paused. "Can we talk?" Mark, caught off guard, nodded. "Sure, but where?" "Now, if you don't mind," she answered, leading him toward a shaded table beneath a massive oak. Amanda and Daniel joined them, smiling mischievously. Actually Daniel, handed Mark a beer. "You'll need this, but take it slow," he teased. Megan leaned in. "About a year and a half ago, Dad asked me to look into your background." She glanced at Grant, who was deep in conversation nearby. "I spoke with Gordon Willis." "Relax. He didn't break confidentiality, only confirmed what you told us. But I did fill in some gaffes." Mark's stomach tightened. Megan continued, "My parents don't know everything yet, but I do. And I can tell you this. After you left, Rachel hoped you'd come back. When she discovered the house in shambles, she panicked. She thought you might have harmed yourself. The police arrived, found your note, and basically told her she was overreacting. Your messages and emails went viral, humiliating her. She delayed the divorce, spent the money you left, and ran into debt. 2 years later, it was finalized. You've been legally free for 6 months." Mark sat quietly, absorbing the news. "Keep going," he managed. "Rachel sold the house," Megan said, "lost her job, started drinking heavily, and fell in with the wrong crowd. Her parents took custody of Anna and Jacob. Your mother sees them often, but Rachel doesn't. She checked into rehab last week. Her parents are stressed and exhausted. Her mom's in poor health. I'm sorry." Just then, Grant and Nina walked over. "Mark," Grant said firmly, "everybody knows now. Your family, her family. Nina and I still don't know every detail, but it's time to stop avoiding it. Other people are involved, people who love you." Mark exhaled heavily. He realized how much he had avoided. Suddenly, from across the lawn, he spotted Hannah. The thought of losing what he had found frightened him. "Why haven't they found me?" he asked. "I got a new license and pay taxes. I'm hardly invisible." Daniel shuffled awkwardly. "I may have helped. When you updated your registration, I arranged for a little confusion at the DMV, and no official search was ever launched. Your mother's worried and blames everyone, except herself." Megan spoke up. "Gordon filed your taxes the first 2 years. You've managed since then. No one else was really looking. Except your mom, of course." Hannah moved closer, placing a gentle hand on Mark's shoulder. Their eyes met, and Mark smiled faintly. He realized he was free, truly free, surrounded by people who cared. I've grown up, he thought. It's time to stop running. Grant's voice was resolute. Son, time for running is over. Mark nodded. Yes, sir. I'm done running. He turned to Hannah. Could someone watch Linda while we take a walk? Amanda immediately jumped up. Got it. Take your time. Hannah smiled gratefully, and she and Mark headed down a narrow path into the woods. 15 minutes later, they emerged by a fallen log near the riverbank. Hannah sat gracefully, patting the trunk for him to join her. Come on, she said with a small smile. She closed her eyes as she leaned back, appearing calm, as though she already knew how this would end. Mark took a breath. Hannah, I need to tell you everything. She opened her eyes. I'm listening. He confessed his deepest regrets, walking out, the anger and the shame. He also admitted how meeting her and Linda had rekindled something he feared was lost forever. When he finished, he braced for judgment. Instead, Hannah laughed lightly. So, she teased, you're basically an honorable guy who made a mistake. Because since I'd known you, you've been nothing but honorable. Mark felt relief flood him. He took her hands. I'm thinking of asking Megan to reach out to Gordon. I want custody of my kids. Rachel's in rehab, unemployed, and her parents have them. I have no idea where I stand legally, but I doubt I'm in a worse spot than she is. I want to bring Anna and Jacob here, to my new life. My mother deserves time with them too. But first, I need to build a house big enough for everyone. Hannah blinked, genuinely surprised. You want all that? She asked softly. And you have feelings for me? Mark gave a faint smile. Yes, I care about you and Linda. I think you could be part of this new family I'm trying to create. Hannah's grin broadened. So you're saying you love me, or that you could? I think it's possible, Mark said, and kissed her gently. It wasn't dramatic, but it felt like a promise. You're mine, she whispered, smiling. And I'm yours. I know an architect who can help with the house. Megan can talk to Gordon about custody. Don't worry about legal fees. We'll figure it out later. Mark nodded, feeling both stunned and hopeful. Without another word, he pulled her into a hug, their shared laughter blending with the soft rustle of the trees. They returned almost an hour later, both smiling and brushing leaves off their clothes, prompting teasing glances from the others. Over the next few days, plans took shape. Megan contacted Gordon. Mark discussed buying land with Grant, hoping to build a home big enough for his children and possibly for his mother. He offered his current cottage to Rachel's parents if they wanted to stay nearby. For the first time in years, Mark felt purpose and direction. With Hannah by his side, he was ready to face his responsibilities. They met with an architect who provided affordable estimates. That Monday, Mark applied for a construction loan, and Megan worked with Gordon's firm to start the custody process. Gordon advised him he might need to return to Fairview for court. Grant urged him, take as much time as you need. Family first. Megan, an expert strategist, crafted a solid case, coordinating with Gordon via video calls and emails. Mark and Hannah's bond grew stronger, though Mark was still cautious. Little Linda was not, taking Mark's hand, squealing with delight whenever he lifted her, insisting on bedtime hugs. One day, she demanded, when will you marry my mom? I'm getting older, and I want a dad. Mark laughed, taken aback by her boldness. When the court date arrived, Rachel had just finished rehab, struggling to piece her life together. Gordon began the process of selling her old house to avoid foreclosure. Mark loaded up his F-150, said emotional goodbyes to Hannah and his newfound family, and drove back to Fairview. Megan promised to join him later that week. Returning home was surreal. Mark drove past the old house. It looked abandoned, overgrown yard, a dent in the garage, boarded windows. Instead of stopping, he went straight to his mother's apartment. She opened the door crying, pulling him into a tight hug. I'm sorry, Mom, Mark murmured. She smiled through tears. Gordon and Gwen will be here soon. I just want to look at you. 2 hours later, Gordon arrived with Gwen. Introductions were made, and the group discussed the case. Megan would come Friday. The trial was Monday, and the judge was a strict but even-handed man who disliked betrayal and parental abandonment. On Friday, Mark picked Megan up at the airport, and she briefed him on new information and fresh leads. On Saturday, the team rehearsed their approach, and though Mark felt they hid something, Gordon insisted he was just on edge. The following Monday was crisp and sunny. Mark, Gordon, Megan, and Gwen met outside courtroom 319. A moment later, Rachel emerged from the elevator with her lawyers. She was pale, eyes heavy with regret. She spotted Mark but was held back by her companions. Megan whispered, "She looks terrible." "Pity, huh?" Mark replied tersely. Then the elevator opened again, revealing Mark's mother and Rachel's parents. His mother hugged him fiercely, followed by Rachel's mother, whose warmth surprised him. Her father extended his hand, and Mark hesitated before shaking it, blurting out, "Rachel just went inside." Her father nodded. "We're here for you, son. She had her chance. Now it's yours." Overcome, Mark hugged the older man. "Thank you, Dad." They filed in, Mark and his supporters on one side, Rachel and her team on the other. A couple of bored-looking reporters sat behind them. At 9:05, the bailiff called the session to order. "All rise for the Honorable Thomas Kincaid, Family Court Judge." Judge Kincaid nodded. Case 213, Mark Davidson versus Rachel Sullivan. Custody of 2 minors. Anna Louise Davidson, age 12, and Jacob Mark Davidson, age 9. Child support and spousal support are also on the docket. The judge looked around. "Are all parties here?" Rachel's lawyer stood. "Rachel Sullivan, defendant, Your Honor." John Parson representing her. Gordon followed. "Gordon Willis for Mark Davidson, Your Honor." The judge studied his notes. "You two are divorced already, correct?" Rachel nodded. "So this is strictly about custody?" She nodded again. Rachel looked at the judge with trembling lips. "My ex-husband claims I'm unfit and wants to take my kids away." The judge's brow furrowed. "And the divorce was final 6 months ago." "Yes, Your Honor," Rachel said quietly. "Why did you divorce?" Judge Kincaid asked. Mark tensed. Gordon placed a calming hand on his arm. Rachel hesitated, then spoke haltingly. "We had gone to Brayton's to celebrate. We argued, and he—" "Objection," Gordon interrupted. The judge frowned. "Grounds." "Her remarks are misleading," Gordon said evenly. Rachel's lawyer spoke up, irritated. "Your Honor, these details have no bearing on custody." The judge looked thoughtful. "Sustained for now. Ms. Sullivan, let's get to the facts. What really happened that night?" Rachel's eyes darted around, tears forming. "I can't," she stammered. The judge turned to Gordon. "Can Mr. Davidson clarify?" "Yes, Your Honor," Gordon said. Mark stood. "Swear me in." "Objection," Rachel's lawyer shouted. "One-sided account." "Overruled," the judge said. The bailiff approached, and Mark was sworn in, stating his name and address. The judge nodded. "Go ahead, Mr. Davidson." Mark described, in detail, how Rachel left him at Brayton's, never returning that night. "She went home with another man and offered no explanation. She didn't say a word," Mark concluded. "Didn't even warn me. So I went home and did the same. I at least left a note." The room went silent, except for Rachel's soft sobs. Suddenly, she shouted, "You abandoned me and the kids, you coward." Mark's voice was controlled but biting. "Like you abandoned me." The gavel rapped. "Order." The judge barked. Turning to Rachel, "Is Mr. Davidson's account correct?" Rachel's tears flowed freely, and her voice shook. "Yes, Your Honor, it's true. All of it. I messed up. So badly." Judge Kincaid shifted his gaze to Mark. "While I understand your situation, you did leave your family for 4 years." Mark began to speak, but Megan gently pulled him down. "Your Honor," she said, stepping forward, "I'm Megan Lewis, representing Mark from Easton. We have witnesses to his character." The judge nodded, and Grant spoke, describing Mark's integrity over the last 4 years. Nina, Harriet, Amanda, Daniel, all offered glowing accounts. Finally, Hannah Carter took the stand, explaining how Mark saved her and her daughter. "He's a man of honor, Your Honor," she said. "I love him." Rachel muttered angrily at that, prompting another sharp rap of the gavel. The judge announced a recess until 2 p.m. and left the bench. Outside the courtroom, Mark turned to Hannah, voice low. "You love me?" She blushed. "Yes. Now you know." Mark smiled softly. "I love you too." They shared a quick embrace as the group headed for a nearby steakhouse. Lunch was surprisingly cheerful, the attorneys confident about the case. Gordon even teased Megan, "If you tire of Easton, I'll find you a place at my firm." Back at the courthouse, they returned to find chaos at Rachel's table. She had disappeared, leaving notarized documents that conceded to Mark's claims and waived her parental rights. Stunned, Mark asked, "What does that mean?" Gordon sighed. "It means you won, son. It's over." Megan put a hand on his shoulder. "Yes, she gave you everything. You're free. Move forward." "It's really over," Mark echoed, numb. Yet he felt sadness at how it ended. His next step would be picking up Anna and Jacob from school. They had no idea their lives were about to shift forever. 2 reporters hovered, but Gordon promised a statement later, hoping a bigger story would distract them soon. Mark arrived at the school with Hannah and Rachel's parents. When Anna and Jacob spilled out of the building, they rushed over excitedly, but froze upon seeing their father. The pause lasted mere seconds before they dashed to him, shouting, "Daddy, where were you? Why didn't you call? Where's Mom?" Mark hugged them, tears threatening. Hannah stood a little aside, letting them have the moment. Finally, Mark introduced her. "Kids, this is Miss Carter, a good friend of mine." They eyed her curiously, and Mark suggested everyone head to Rachel's parents' place for lunch. At the house, Mark gathered them in the backyard. "Kids, your mom left again. I don't know where, but we'll try to find her. For now, she's gone." Anna looked sad but not shocked, and Jacob spoke bluntly. "She had different men over all the time. It was awful." Anna agreed. Hannah moved closer and squeezed Mark's hand. Jacob gave her a pointed look. "Is she your friend, Dad?" Mark hesitated, flushed. "Yes," he said simply. Anna giggled at Hannah. "You bumped into Dad, and it looked like you liked it." Hannah smiled while Mark cleared his throat, embarrassed. With a hint of humor, Jacob said, "She's acceptable, Dad." "Good choice." Everyone laughed a little, easing the tension. Over the next 2 days, Mark told his children and their grandparents about his plans to move them all to Silver Bay. The kids were excited, especially when they learned their grandparents would join them. Rachel's parents, exhausted by the situation, welcomed a fresh start. They sold their home and helped Mark's mother pack for the move. As soon as the paperwork was in order, they caravanned east, Mark's father-in-law driving one car, Mark and his mother in the moving truck. 3 days later, they arrived in Silver Bay. The children explored their new home, thrilled by the extra space, while the grandparents admired their own nearby cottage. Nina and Amanda joined them, handing over keys and showing them around. Mark returned home to find Hannah already chatting with the kids. Anna greeted him with a playful glare. "So do I get a sister and a new mom all at once?" Mark sputtered. Maybe. That's a lot to assume." She laughed and hugged him. Jacob said dryly, "Now I see why you kept talking about a big new house, Dad." Mark, embarrassed, ruffled his son's hair. By mid-August, Mark and Hannah weighed in a small ceremony. Their honeymoon in Riverport was simple but sweet, filled with music and amazing food. Returning home, Mark felt peace and gratitude for his new life. Rachel remained out of contact, but his days were now filled with family, love, and honest work. He couldn't deny a trace of guilt, wondering if he could have handled things differently. Yet he was certain of one truth: he was grateful. And that was enough.